Catholic Family News will be hosting a range of interviews and special reports on the subject of China and Catholicism in the next few weeks. Our first guest goes by the name of Western Confucius. He's a traditional Catholic Chinese blogger, and the reason why I became so interested in his works is that he's the first Chinese person I've seen that actively supports traditional Catholicism. Now, while you may not agree with his whole perspective, I think this interview provides a great historical overview on the subject of China, and he also mentions some things that I believe will be a revelation to our listeners on the subject of China. So I hope you enjoy the interview. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Catholic Family News. I'm Murray Rundus, the production manager here, and I'm pleased to be joined by the Western Confucian Journal. There's a great Twitter page that I've been very intrigued by, and we're running a series on China and some interesting things going on there. And so we have some great information for you today. How are you doing today?
Very good here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get started, I wanted to go into just about your interesting work. What inspired you to start up this page, and what's your general background that inspired you to do this?
Well, I think that's I would go back to the pontificate of Pope Benedict XVI, and back then I was I'm Chinese, so I was in China, and Pope Benedict XVI wrote a very beautiful, wonderful letter, a pastoral letter, to the Catholics in China. Advocating, asking us to do reconciliation with each other, and to try to make a sort of like better relationship, so to speak, with the state. So I think since then I started was on the internet in China under the same nickname, Western Confucius. So more or less is about it. It's more about like breaching between the East and West, because somehow a lot of Catholics in China, they are not very good in English or foreign languages, so they may not that easy to learn about the news in outside of China. But now I'm out of China now, so I'm more like trying to continue that bridge, that journey, and to make learn a lot of unheard voices as Christian, as Catholics in China.
Yeah, it's really interesting that that bridge between East and West, it really still hasn't been built. And something I wanted to ask you is, I think our audience, for the most part, and really this goes for America and the West, Chinese history and the history of Catholicism in China, there's a sort of gap there in knowledge. How did Catholicism enter into China? When did it? And was it successful in its early years, and moving on to today?
Well, in fact, Christianity arrived in China pretty early. Pretty early. Um, the first arrival of Christianity would be during the uh, Tang Dynasty. Tang Dynasty. So I think it arrives there with the Nestorian, which somehow the Church of the East. They kind of spread in China because Tang Dynasty, they were very open-minded, and that's why the beginning of the so-called Silk Road, linking between the ancient China and Middle Asia and all the way to Eastern Europe, and they were quite successful on settled in various parts in China. But later on, in by the mid of Tang Dynasty, one of the emperor got very upset because he witnessed a lot of foreigners settling in China and brought with them different religions from Buddhism, Manichaeism, and also Islam, later on Islam, and also the Christianity. So he got rather upset. So he kind of started a movement purging foreign religions, and that includes, Nestorianism in China. But here and there, if you got a chance to go to China, you will still be able to find some kind of remnants or monuments left over by that part of history. That's Tang Dynasty. But later on, China got, another few hundred years, and got occupied or by the Mongols, the Mongolians, the Yuan dynasty. And the Yuan dynasty was kind of horrendous, because they like conquering a lot of parts of Eastern Europe. So the Pope of the time sent envoys trying to link up to speak to the emperor, saying like, "Hey, why don't you just stop there? Don't try to go further, further west, and then just stop there." And of course, the kind of negotiation, I think, is sort of like broke down because the Genghis Khan literally just asked, the envoy, just told the envoy that you need to bow and kowtow, and we don't care, we don't care about anything. But because of that journey, the Franciscan somehow sent missions, and they arrived in today's Beijing. And there they set up, with the imperial endorsed by the emperor, the Mongol emperor, and they settled in Beijing, and they built two churches at least, as far as we know. And there are also records that these Yuan dynasty Franciscan missions kind of had a very uneasy relationship with the Nestorian there, because the Nestorian they settled there quite early, and they encountered this kind of like Latin Rite missionaries arriving with bishops. They kind of, the relationship wasn't that easy, and that's the I would call it second time of the arrival of Christianity. But with the fall of the very short-lived Mongol Yuan dynasty, the Han dynasty, the Han people, came back into power. And with the Han dynasty, the main dynasty kind of ripped out, they kicked all the missionary out. So Christianity or Catholicism today arrived in China. A lot of people would contribute to Matteo Ricci, the Jesuit mission. But in reality, the Dominicans arrived 40 years well before Matteo Ricci set foot in mainland China. But yes, today Catholicism, our history, very long, could all date back to 16th century, when Matteo Ricci first arrived in China via Macau.
That's
You know,
fascinating.
the tiny former Portuguese colony. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes. It's fascinating because we look around the world and we see the spread of Catholicism and how it sort of intermingled with various cultures. Do you think that traditional Chinese culture was well suited to adopt Catholicism? And if so, what were some of the aspects that made it compatible with Catholicism? And what were some of the aspects that the Chinese needed to work on sort of baptizing, putting aside in order to adopt the Roman Catholic faith?
Well, Christianity arrived, as I tried to introduce, arrived in China actually pretty early. First in the 7th century, well, survived into the 10th century, but today Catholicism could again date back to 16th century. But the thing is, Matteo Ricci, upon his arrival in China, the more he study about Chinese ancient works or classics, the more he understand and understood and comprehend about the Chinese culture. So, but bear in mind, he arrived in China in the 16th century, so it more or less a time when people got the Reformation in the West, right?
Mhm.
So he kind of didn't bow to him Reformation because he was in Asia, in China. So there he started writing a lot of kind of like catechism or some like treatises about Catholicism in Chinese, in classical Chinese. So historically, I think like we as a Chinese, when we adopt or convert to Catholicism, there's no need to embrace a new culture, because a lot of Jesuit missionaries, they believe that in ancient Chinese culture, all the classics, Confucius, Mencius, Lao Tzu, all these classical ancient Chinese philosophers, some of them they got something contained the teachings of Catholicism. So what we need to do is just to, as Chinese, when we convert to Catholicism, we need to embrace or learn the Christian love. That kind of abstract idea of love is kind of different. But besides that, I think it's quite easy for Chinese to to convert to Catholicism.
Yeah, I think there's a similarity in the West. Of course, we have the Greek thinkers, right? Aristotle, Plato, and these, of course, weren't Catholics, but it's certainly in the Western tradition to adopt them. And of course, Saint Thomas especially saw that as especially important, merging Aristotle with the Catholic faith. When it comes to these Chinese thinkers, you mentioned Lao Tzu and Confucius, and of course, your journal is the Western Confucian Journal. Do you think one philosophy, Taoism or Confucianism, it's more compatible with the Catholic faith? Do you think there's a similarity when it comes to adopting Aristotelianism or adopting Platonism? Do you think one is more important than the others when it comes to helping Chinese become Catholic and understand the Catholic faith?
Um, I will put it in this way. Uh, as you know, in the West, in theological school or in seminaries, we aren't always, we're taught to understand and comprehend that philosophy in itself is the midwife of theology.
Mhm.
So it's a tool. So it's a tool, to understand and comprehend the teachings of Christ and the mystery of our faith. But at the same time, I think in Chinese culture, the teachings of Confucius could also be used, because in even Lao Tzu, because Lao Tzu and Confucius, like Confucius, for example, he regarded himself as you conservator. He wasn't. I mean, he didn't see himself as an innovator, but conservator of ancient Chinese wisdoms. And we ancient Chinese, from the very beginning, we believe in a thing called the way, the Tao, the way of heaven, heavenly heavenly way, Tian Dao. And that Tian Dao, as Jesuit missionary would introduce to us the Chinese very early, our Catholic ancestors in China, that the Tian Dao referred to the logos,
Mm.
the word of God. So I think I'm trying to use that, to try to share that. I think in Chinese culture, that's kind of a lot of similarities, and ancient Chinese philosophies could equally, I believe, could be used to comprehend or or not interpret, but to yes, to interpret the Catholic faith to Eastern nations.
Yeah, that's fascinating. When it comes to traditional Chinese culture, at least from the outside looking in, it I think this goes for, cultures around the world, but it would seem that it is largely eroding in some way. Do you think that this is an accurate assessment? And if so, do you attribute that to the establishment of the Communist Party in China, or do you go back even further to something like Sun Yat-sen, the revolutionary there in China? Do you think that there's been a sort of trajectory away from traditional Chinese culture to a more liberal, a more secular, atheistic view that is making it more difficult for Chinese to accept Catholicism today?
Very interesting question. Um, there was a fellow born in late Qing dynasty. He wasn't born in China though. His name was Gu Hongmin. Hongmin Ku Hongmin. He was born in back then British Malaya. And there he got a very good. His family got very well off, a Chinese family in British Malaya, and his father literally, got a very good relationship with a lowland Scot who sort of worked as a businessman in that part of the world. And from the age of 6, he was already very eloquent and fully very fluent in English. And by the age of 12, and he started studying in Britain and in Scotland in a boarding school, and graduated in the University of Edinburgh with a master in English literature. And further, he studied in Germany and France, and later on returned to British Malaya to work as a British civil servant. And more or less the age of 30, through his family connection, he started to work for the Qing dynasty, the Qing government in China. It would be his first time setting foot in China. And of course, his kind of dream fell because we got the Xinhai Revolution. So Dr. Sun Yat-sen overthrew the Qing dynasty. So, but later on, he wrote several books. He wrote a book interestingly called the Chinese Oxford Movement. In that title, he compared Henry Newman with his mentor in China, Zhang Zhidong, and and in that book, he described China back then and Qing dynasty and early the first 10 years after the Xinhai Revolution. He described that China as a sort of very vulgar. Why vulgar? Because Chinese people, they were very desperate, particularly the new ruling class, the people in the who receive Western education, they regard themselves as progressive. They're very desperate to use Western technology and to learn Western knowledges in order to save China. He saw that as a sort of self-destruction, interestingly. And also he called them liberal. So I think going back to your question, I think liberalism, I think, has dominated Chinese society for over at least 100 years now, a century now. Looking back, like even early Republican era, there was I will even put it in this way, absolutely non-existent of anything we could call in the West, like similar anything we could call in the West as conservatism or even traditionalism. Everything in China back then, even 100 years ago, were literally liberal. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Wow. So do you see it as a I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Mao saw himself as a sort of successor to Sun Yat-sen. So do you think that liberalism birthed communism in China in that way? Do you think that's the way, do you think that was the thing that allowed
Mm.
communism to dominate China is the first establishment of liberalism?
Very true. Very spot on. I mean, as a Chinese, I think a lot of people, they would of course accuse the CCP, Mao Zedong, the chairman Mao, but I don't think, I don't see it that way. I think absolutely you're right, and the CCP actually was given birth by the KMT, Kuomintang, the party founded by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and it was exactly Dr. Sun Yat-sen who first collaborated with the Soviet Union by inviting the Soviet Union to come over to China, setting up a military academy, the first ever modern military academy for the Nationalist Party, and allow the establishment of the Chinese Communist Party, or the forerunner of the CCP, the Chinese Bolshevik in China. So, and you're very true. From historically, from the Republican era of liberalism, and even the CCP, sort of like overthrowing the Kuomintang regime, the nationalists. But in itself, a lot of not all of us, but some of us, the Chinese, we do see the CCP as part of the KMT, the Kuomintang. To us, they're essentially the same, no difference. What the difference is, one would sort of allow some sort of free trade, and the other one adopted Marxist Leninist, the communist approach in terms of economy.
Hmm. I think this sort of leads to a geopolitical question today, because of course we have the Taiwanese uh, conflict with China that does brew up. Do you consider the looking at the communist Chinese government and then looking at the Taiwanese government? Uh, who do you see as being the legitimate government, if we can use that term? And do you think that even matters? Do you think it really just comes down to well, the CCP are the de facto controllers of China, and that's the way it is? Do you think there's any point in that discourse?
Well, I think, well, personally, I don't think that really matters because it's, well, whereas in China, the CCP, has we enforce the message that they are the legitimate successor of the KMT. So
Yeah.
they represent, legitimately China, and it has been the case since the 70s, isn't it? Pragmatically, so it's our PRZ who's being the standing member of the Security Council of the United Nations, and equally the Kuomintang. Now we on paper it's called the Republic of China in Taiwan. And I think under the DDP, they have tried very hard for the past 20 years to get away, or get away the image, or try to reinforce the message that no matter how you see us, but Taiwan is an independent sovereign state. So I think that kind of narrative that I don't think it exists. But I think what matters is for both sides to go back to the 1992 consensus, like one China, two different interpretations. That there's only one China, but that we could have different interpretations. You may argue that you're China, or you're Taiwan now, but whatever. But I think looking forward, I do genuinely hope that it could be resolved like peacefully, no matter what. But I think I want to bring another issue like geopolitically, because a lot of people, after seeing me, having the name called Resting Confucius, would oftentimes make some, I do think, like rather irrelevant, but to them maybe irrelevant, a connection with the Confucian Institute, which I think has become quite a big issue now in the West. I want to also stress like a lot of people they do ask me question like how do I see the 12 core values or 12 core socialist value now advocated by Xi Jinping. I'm not sure you heard about it, the 12 core values or ideology of the socialism with Chinese characteristic.
Yep.
For me, yeah, personally, that's literally just the four cardinal principles and eight virtues advocated by Chiang Kai-shek by the nationalist party when they still hold power in China. So Xi Jinping, to me personally, I see him sort of quite an interesting mix. Some of his policies and ideologies would very much, I would say, similar with those ideologies of Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist party, before they lost power in mainland China. We call that some of us call that as Neo-Confucianism. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, it's very interesting.
Yes, that is. And if we can zero in on the Communist Party here, and sort of how it's evolved since the Great Leap Forward and since the defeat of the nationalists in China. When it comes to Catholics in particular, how did the establishment of the Communist Party and the Great Leap Forward and the exile, if you will, of the nationalist to the Taiwanese island, how did that affect Catholicism in China?
Well, and that's another very long story.
Yes. So
I must say, yeah, very long story. And well, the thing is, it was the policy of the nationalist party for the Catholic Church to retreat together with the government to Taiwan. So before Mao standing at the Tiananmen Square announcing the establishment of today's PLC, missionaries or Chinese Catholics face two options: either retreat China, go to Taiwan, or just go back to the home country, or stay in China. Many of them decided to stay in China. Some of them, like for example, a very famous cardinal in China, Cardinal Joseph Chen Xan,
yep.
Joseph Zan. He, kind of because of his society, the selections, he got stuck in Italy, so he could only further his study in Italy and eventually ordained in Italy. But many of them decided, including missionary, to stay over in China. Uh, it wasn't easy, the relationship for those who decided to stay in China. Since the 50s onwards, there were loads of movements, like donating churches for the rebuilding of China. So some of them, they would donate churches, like for example the cathedral in Beijing. The priests in charge back then, without authorization of the Archbishop of Beijing, who is Thomas Tenkenzin. Tenkenzin already fled with the Kuomintang in Taiwan, and he decided alone to donate the whole lot of the cathedral compound, including the episcopal palace, to the new regime for development. And at the same time, there were also movement trying to kind of make the Catholic Church in China detached from the outside world. So as what we now known as the Catholic Patriotic Association. Many got persecuted, I would say, persecuted and even martyred because of that. In the 50s, that's the part of history, and some went very much resistant, tried to resist that kind of policies. Of course, it would be someone, I'm sure a lot of people would know about him, the late Cardinal Elacius Compinet, the former Bishop of Shanghai, who got arrested in 1950 overnight on the 8th of September. We call it in Shanghai the September the 8th persecution. Yes, that part of history, early part, very uneasy, very, very, very uneasy. But of course, a lot of people, got illicit episcopal consecration in China, so automatically excommunicated. Some involved either as consecrated or co-consecrators. It wasn't easy, but I will share one record from the bishop representing Hong Kong, an Italian missionary bishop in Hong Kong. He shared with in the Vatican that he held different views, because one of the priests who used to be under him in Hong Kong decided to went back to China, to go back to China and get to receive illegal episcopal consecration. And to the best of his knowledge, this priest was a very good priest, a very holy one. The reason to go back to collaborate with the new regime could be mixed, because some of them, they saw that as, we can't leave the church. The faithfuls were there in China. We can't just leave them alone. If we continue to resist the regime, the more we resist them, the more persecutions we got. And without priests, without bishops, there will be no Holy Mass. Without Holy Mass, there will be no sacraments. Without no sacraments, there will be no grace in China. So some people would decided to cooperate with the new regime. That's the history of China. But while in Taiwan, it would be very different, very, very different. So, yeah.
Yes, because you mentioned the Catholics going with the nationalists to Taiwan. When it comes to mainland China today, what would you say the split is between people a part of the the Patriotic Association and the sort of underground church, as it's sometimes called in traditional and Catholic media? What would you say is the percentage split of Chinese that follow either one?
I think, again, at the beginning, I mentioned about the pastoral letter of the late Pope Benedict XVI.
Mhm.
Up to this moment, to the best of my knowledge, all the bishops in China, with the state church or the Catholic Patriotic Association associated, they are equally recognized by the Vatican. So none of these bishops are being excommunicated.
Mhm.
So and most of them, they are recognized by the Holy See as the ordinary of the diocese, of their own diocese. So I think now it's time for a lot of Chinese Catholics in China to leave aside all the historical tensions or misunderstandings, and to try to work together for betterment. That would be uneasy. I know that would be uneasy, but there are more challenges, I believe, in Chinese society now because it's extremely liberal, despite the reality that the Chinese regime, they that famous being kind of very consistent in implementing their policies, but they are anti-liberalism, I must say, in China. In a sense, they're liberal, but in the sense that they stresses the importance of traditional family values, the Confucian values now, which I think consistent with Catholicism. But despite the application of the government, but the Chinese society, people in China, 1.4 billion of them, of us, we are very liberal. I mean, all the social issues we got, I mean, people have in the West, we equally have them in China. Very low birth weight, people are not getting married, sex liberation, uh, people they literally just enjoy, all the lust and materialism. A very serious, I think, social challenge in mainland China. So I think it's now time for us to lay aside all those things unnecessary, I believe, and just to stick together. This would be more important. And for the Catholic Patriotic Association, they have suffered also the same problem. There is very little priestly vocation. So looking for another 10 years to come, for example, larger dioceses in like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, they may have 10 or 15 or even 20 churches, parishes they have to run. But after another 10 years, another decade, there could only be maybe just 6 working priests. So it would be terrible. The situation would be extremely terrible. So I think it's now time to stick together and work on something for the evangelization of the country, or to do what we have to do.
It seems an incredibly unfortunate history the past 100 years, because, as you mentioned, all these geopolitical struggles, but also, of course, after the '60s, we had the Second Vatican Council, and especially in the West, we experienced a large decline in practically everything that matters, in belief, in priestly vocations, in religious vocations. Did China, among the Catholics, did they experience a similar decline after the Second Vatican Council? And what's the status of traditional Catholicism in China today?
Yeah, it's China, mainland China. It would be a very different story because the last encyclical, I think it would be issued by the Vatican before Pope Benedict XVI would be under the pontificate of the papacy of Pius XII as Sinarum
Wow.
Gentiles in 1954 as Sinarum Gentes, and because it was a sort of warning of telling the Catholics and bishops and priests and Catholics in China that there's no need to set up a sort of like Free South movement or Patriotic Association, etc. But historically, in mainland China, uh, after the death of Mao, religious activities started to resume with the assistance of the government. So the government in the late 70s and early 80s, they spent money, renovating churches across the country, because a lot of churches would either be burned down, demolished, or converted into other uses as storages or school hall, concert hall, music hall, etc. So they spend a lot of money, and gathering from all corners of China, like former priests or even lay brothers, whether they want to come back and work for the church, because now they try to, and reassuring them that there will be no consequence, because a lot of them got really paranoid. Think about like over 20 years of social unrest, great leap forwards, cultural revolutions, terrifying. And so they need to reassure them that it's genuine, that's the end of it, and China is going to embrace a better future. So encouraging them to come back to serve the church is actually the government, the CCP, doing it. So it was the late 70s and early 80s. And despite the fact that they allow the resume of religious activities, government official back then told the priest associated with the Chinese Catholic Association, Patriotic Association, that they were only allowed to celebrate Mass, not in the new form, not in the new order Mass, Loftus Order, but only according to the pre-1962 versions. You could only say Mass in Latin. So, well, until the mid-90s, all the priests, all the liturgies celebrated, whether it be Mass, confession, baptism, weddings, priestly ordination, episcopal consecrations, all of them, all of these were conducted in Latin well into the mid-90s. By the mid-90s, you know, Deng Xiaoping, you know, and after the Tiananmen Square in 1989, in the mid-90s, you know, under Jiang Zemin and a new president of China, and they have achieved, they already achieved some sort of economic success. So they want to further open up the country. So the government made a decision that they could allow Biden for the Catholics to celebrate the Mass as, you know, outside of China to celebrate the Loftus Order. So they invited or allowed it now Cardinal Joseph Zen, together with one diocesan priest called Tom Lokofei, two together went to Shanghai, the Greek seminary, and celebrated the first ever Loftus Order Mass in China. The celebrant was Cardinal Joseph Zen, now Joseph Zen. And from then, in the mid-90s, they were allowed it. So they went through a lot of priests outside of China, tried to go to China, allowed it, and they teach them the spirit of the Vatican Council and teach them how to celebrate the Loftus Order in Chinese. And gave away also for free Chinese missal in Chinese. So from the mid-90s onward, what the challenges we have in the West, or people have in the West in the church, we also have that in China. Lack of religious discipline. Older generation of faithful got very upset, and some of them devastated because the new liturgy and new theology, because it's actually basically new. So to them, it's a great challenge. Faithfuls were told that they should no longer to chant everything in Latin. You should dump the Latin, because Latin, you know, how would the Chinese know the Latin? So why don't you just sing Chinese, you know, instead of singing Latin? So they dump away all the Latins, and a lot of churches, they got a lot of donation or support of the government, so they renovated churches and tearing up the high altars. Like, for example, if you got a chance to go to the the Cathedral of Our Savior in Beijing, it's already renovated like 5 years ago, and they took away the Gothic choir loft, smash it up, and smash up the high altar, and now replace it with I think a big round marble table, as we got in the West. So and pretty much the same. And I would also share one. The late Bishop of Fengxiang, Lucas Lee. Lucas Lee made himself very famous because during the pontificate of Pope Benedict XVI, during the World Bishop Conference, he was invited to attend, but he didn't make his way. Didn't make the trip. So he wrote a letter in Latin to Pope Benedict XVI, and his letter was read aloud in front of the all bishops from the world. And in the letter, he reassured the Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, that in China, faithfuls, laymen, we are very faithful. We have kept on our faith despite the persecution. He put it in this way: despite we got many persecutions in China, but the more we persecuted, the purer we got in faith. But now with the Vatican II, we have a lot of problems shared with the West amongst the clergies. So that's worrisome. So pretty much the same here. And we could also look at Taiwan. Taiwan, without the CCP, without the Cultural Revolution. But Catholicism is, I think, is diminishing.
Right.
diminishing. Yeah.
So just so I'm clear on this, it's you're saying that after the Second Vatican Council, with the Patriotic Association, the Mass and all the sacraments were still celebrated in the traditional form in Latin up until the 90s, when the hierarchy brought in the Catholic hierarchy brought in the new form. And that is what
Yeah.
and that is what introduced so many different problems that the West has with the Second Vatican Council
Yeah.
into China. And you're saying that Cardinal Zen was one of the well, you said the first one to celebrate the Novus
Yes.
Ordo and introduce this into mainland China.
Indeed. And one historical fact is during the Second Vatican Council, we had the Cultural Revolution in China. So all the bishops in China couldn't attend the Second Vatican Council. China was only represented by Chinese bishops in Taiwan, and some of the bishops who were in exile outside of China. So most of them were Chinese missionary bishops in China. Yes, that's another fact I want to add on.
So, with all of this in mind, and I'm sure that's going to be a major revelation for many of our listeners about that. Um, I'm sure you saw the report from LifeSite News about Cardinal Parolin saying that he hopes to renew the deal between the Vatican and and China for the ecclesial relations over there. Do you see that as a positive thing, continuing this deal between China and the Vatican? And what would you say are some of the challenges with the Patriotic Association, and what have been the historical challenges that the Patriotic Association has rectifying that with the Catholic faith? Do you think there's any issues there?
It's mixed. It's very mixed. Um, I think just looking at the deal, investiture is investiture historically an issue for the Catholic Church? No, no, right? One very particular diocese in China, the Diocese of Macau, for example, it was first established in the 60th century, so making the Diocese of Macau the only diocese in China who has their own chapter of canons, because it was established very pretty much early. So automatically, back then, once the papacy, the Pope decided to set up a diocese, of course, would come with it a chapter of canon. So it was it was a set man, it was on a set menu back then. But look at it just for Macau, for example, one diocese in China. Historically, all bishops were Portuguese, and all of them were appointed not by the papacy, but by the sovereigns of Portugal. So again, is investiture, would that be an issue? Personally, I don't think that's an issue. At the same time, in Vietnam, we know that's a Vietnam model. So I don't think it's a big issue. But the problem, personally speaking, with the election of bishop is an issue, because I don't think democracy is compatible with Catholicism, and particularly in ecclesial structure. So currently in China, all the bishops associated with the Catholic Patriotic Association, they were elected locally by members of the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, which comprises of members from from the clergy, from religious and laymen. So we're having bishops in China being elected by a mix of religious, clergies, and laymen, which I don't think that's possible. That sounds quite like the Church of England, which I don't think we have that kind of historically we have that kind of structure. We may have election in those days. We got bishop elected by the chapter of canon, but later on, after the elected bishop, the name would be nominated, would go into the Holy See. The Holy See would say, okay, I'll approve it, would endorse it. That's it. So I think that's the one issue that's my concern, because I don't think bishops should be elected, having the layman involved. But the Catholic Patriotic Association, I think, in China rather well, work rather well. In terms of how handling relationship with the establishment in China. Mm. But of course, again, it's a vast country in China. We've got 1.4 billion population. Anyone involved with the structure may potentially involve corruptions. So, which something Chairman Xi Jinping has also been, tackling corruptions issue in China. So, I wouldn't say it's perfect. There are a lot of problems with the Catholic Patriotic Association, but genuinely, I don't think that there are many issues with the Catholic Patriotic Association beside that part of having bishop elected democratically, which I don't think is consistent with Catholicism. Yeah.
To sort of zero in, there's on the question at hand, there's, at least in the West, and people who have maybe a cursory knowledge of this topic of the Patriotic Association and the history with the Vatican. I think many people have the impression that the Patriotic Association is promoting communism, promoting Marxism, that the priests that intertwined with the preaching and the liturgy is sort of this forced, you must promote Marxism, you must promote communism. Is that the case? Do you think that over the years since the establishment of the association, and after the Second Vatican Council, but before the 90s, do you think the Patriotic Association was doing a good job catechizing? Does it do a good job catechizing today, teaching people the Catholic faith unadulterated?
Well, that's obviously one of the biggest concern back then during the papacy of Pope Pius the 12th,
Mhm.
because it seemed back then to the Holy See that the new communist regime tried to set up a sort of parallel structure in China, which would manipulate it, and eventually would eliminate Catholicism. By indoctrinating Catholics, believing in communism. But I think that's kind of invalid now, because looking back the history of the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association in China, there were challenges, and they were equally members of these association were equally persecuted during the Cultural Revolution.
Mm.
A lot of people, they may forget it, but we won't. So a lot of them equally got persecuted by the Patriotic Association. It was definitely so, under the influence of socialism, because it was a regime pushing forward, cutting ties, all the ties with the West. But don't forget that before 1950s, most of the dioceses in China were run by religious orders. For example, 5 dioceses in Lower West China that belonged to the Franciscan were run by Franciscan missionaries. And even the diocese of Shanghai, despite we have the first local indigenous bishop, later Cardinal Elacius Compiègne, but Cardinal Kong, yes, he was a diocesan priest, diocesan bishop. But the thing is, his diocese were heavily relied by the Jesuits, the French Jesuits, and these French Jesuits essentially own a lot of churches. His own cathedral was a very tiny, small parish, and the Jesuits in China, in Shanghai, in his own diocese, own a cathedral size like parish church. So that's the reality. I think it was not right. It could be handled better, but that's history now. But
Mhm.
looking now today, the Catholic Patriotic Association, I don't, in no way I would endorse that any like Western journalists or even China hand they were accused. I don't think they know anything about China and the Chinese Catholics, because in no way they would be reinforcing socialism. Oh yeah, see you like Western Confucius, you're lying because I got report seeing that bishops and priests that they have to attend mandatory lectures organized by the government, uh, teaching them about the thoughts of the Xi Jinping, and also what's the 12 core socialist values. But the thing is, the 12 core socialist values of with Chinese characteristic, and even Xi Jinping thought itself, I don't think there's anything contain anything communist. They may still use here and there a bit of like socialistic faces, communist faces, but the intrinsically they are all quite Confucian. So Xi Jinping spoke about the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, and that rejuvenation is like going back to our historic roots. Would that mean like going back to Cultural Revolution? It would be foolish to believe in that way. Would it be going back to the era of Mao Zedong, even the cult of Mao? I think anyone who ever been to China or who have ever come across any ethnic Chinese would not believe so. So it is actually going back to the historic roots of the ancient Chinese wisdoms of Confucius, Mencius, Laozi, Confucianism, and that's the thoughts of Xi Jinping. So I would, oftentimes I would dispute with a lot of these kind of narratives.
So you see China today as sort of it's the successor of just by the fact that the government was established long ago by Mao, it's a successor of a communist state. But you think that the state has evolved to something that is intrinsically not communist anymore. It's adopted a different uh, view on how to run its country. I think some people are gonna would bring this up, and I'll raise an objection about, for example, the one child policy, things like that, in how communist how some communists in China, or members of the CCP, we might more accurately put it, are promoting things that are atheistic, that are materialistic. Do you think that those things should prohibit someone from encouraging this government as a Catholic?
Well, yeah, oftentimes people speak about like I remember the other day I was kind of cross-examined cross-examined by someone like oh yes, but let me ask you three questions. The first question is what's your stand with Xi Jinping on Xinjiang? What's your take on the Tiananmen Square? And what about the Chinese spy? And all right, so one child policy, it was only introduced in the 80s, um 80s, but I think I could still remember in the 90s, a lot of Christian communities or churches outside of China, they use one child policy to depict a China as being communistic and evil. I remembered it. But what about now? We're having issues of abortion. We have abortion, uh, you know, terrible things, and we have government like reinforcing abortions, and I think equally, evil. So looking at China, of course, you kind of like it was a state policy, but a lot of people then just don't know these policy was actually solicited by the West. There was several. There was the written record of several delegates representing the interests of the British American government and United Nations arriving in China, speaking with Deng Xiaoping, that trying to get Deng Xiaoping reassuring them that China would it would implement some sort of policies that would ultimately reduce the population in China, because back in the late 70s, after the death of Mao, they got a big concern that with the Chinese population would be uncontrollable. So the one child policy was compromise of the Deng Xiaoping and the West, that as long as Deng Xiaoping could reassure the West that the growth of the Chinese population is controlled, it would not be massive, it would be controlled. So with the one child policy, and in return, China we receive economic, financial, and technological support from the West. So it was a compromise. If Catholics outside of China believe, as I believe, one child policy is evil, then we should go back and ask your government or governments in the West, why would they come back in the late 70s and early 80s to China and try to ask the Chinese state to implement a one child policy, which would let so many unborn babies, so many deaths of unborn babies? So I'm not sure I could answer your question, but and oftentimes I got people asking me the same question over and over again, so that I would answer them the same thing. But now today, 2024, now I don't think the one child policy is no longer exist. So I don't think there's any issue now in China. What China got is a very low birth rate and worrying, just exactly as the same in the West.
That's a revelation to me, goodness gracious, about the West soliciting that. And to sort of use that to transition to wrap this up, I wanted to ask you a sort of concluding question to move forward. And it's sort of a two-part question. Firstly, there's many people on the right wing, as we would call it, people who are traditionalists, people who are conservative, who would say that China might need to be an ally in the future in order to just fight off liberalism. Do you see that as as something to move forward with, that people on the right should move forward with, asking to create better relations with China? And do you see any problems with that when it comes to traditionalists in the West? And secondly, what do you think moving forward is the way that we can see growth for traditional Catholicism in China?
Well, let me get back to your last question, because I think you
Mhm.
asked me earlier. I didn't answer. Um, Traditional Catholicism in China. There is there's always a lead of traditional Catholicism in China. Uh, 10 years ago, there were groups of young people in China, in major cities, or even like in provincial cities. They gathered themselves together online and tried to, push forward or introduce traditional Catholicism, the traditional liturgy in China. But they all failed because to priests other from the associated with the Catholic Patriotic Association or the underground church, they saw I think they still see no need to have traditional mass revived or restored in China. The only one who implemented the motu proprio of of the sacramental caritati's of Pope Benedict XVI was a very tiny diocese. The bishop I mentioned, Bishop of Vongzhen, the late Bishop of Vongzhen, Bishop Lucas Lee, who implemented that motu proprio. But besides, I don't think I'm not aware that any other parts of China they welcome the revival or which introduction of the new mass. I mean of the old mass. So there's always a lead. I think if the regime or the Chinese Catholic Association would recognize it and try to start reintroducing the traditional liturgy in China, I think it would be beneficial for the evangelization in China. Mm. And about like how traditional Catholics in the West or the white wingers or white wingers should see. Um, well, um, Monsignor Vigano. Monsignor Vigano, I think he has been very evocative, and his name has become some sort of taboo somehow in the West now. I mean, Monsignor Vigano. Monsignor Vigano, I think like 3 4 years ago, he spoke about that America should somehow work with Russia, with Putin, to go against China. But
Mhm.
yeah, he did. And because China is socialist or communist, that's what he spoke about. But I would disagree with His Excellency on this, because China has long ceased to be communist. And even like in the Catholic definition on socialism, uh, you know, I tried very hard, looking at all the policy of Xi Jinping, I could hardly find anything socialist according to the definition of Catholicism on socialism. So I don't think I do disagree. But your question is whether the West should work with China. Um, I think it's difficult. It's because it's a geopolitical, tensions. It's not about ideological. Ideological is about geopolitical. So it's like two empire, or crashing together. One like past Americana, one past Seneca crashing together. I think it's very difficult. But what I would say is that some people may see Xi Jinping, or optimistically, I mean, some Xi Jinping or his policy as right wing
Yeah.
or traditional or anti-liberalism. That's oftentimes I will come across with. But yes, that's why I do support many policies of Xi Jinping. But doesn't mean that I don't have other opinions about the policies in China, which I oftentimes I do. But I do support the mainstream policy of Xi Jinping. But the thing is, people just look at Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping won't be here forever. So oftentimes I will ask people to try to look at China after Xi Jinping. China after Xi Jinping, it would be very different. Because underlying all the propagandas of the state during Xi Jinping, is the equal abits of liberalism or postmodernism in China. Again, uh, gender politics, gender Confucians, no, not Confucius, Confucian, gender Confucians, uh, all exist in China. Sex liberation, sex addicts, drug addicts, just drug addiction, materialism, consumerism, the pursuit of happiness equal to the pursuit of luxurious goods, the absence and the loss of marriages, the loss of family values, all exist in China, underlying under all the propaganda. So 8 years ago, even Xi Jinping warned the party members that as a party collectively, as the governing machine, the establishment, they have to relook the kind of approach that they have on propaganda, because he realizes the propagandas of the CCP has somehow failed, and particularly to the younger generations. I have a lot of people born after the age of 95 and on the millennium coming over me and saying, "Oh, see you, like Western Confucius, would you help me?" I said, "What could I assist you?" I said, "Oh, I need to learn more about Catholicism. I'm a Chinese. I want to learn more Catholicism because I see that I can't get on with the flow, the mainstream, my peers." I said, "How come? Because you're a young man, young woman, young ladies. I mean, why don't you just go out and enjoy your La Dolce Vita?" He said, "I can't because they endorses gender confusions, people like having casual sex, a very serious issue. Um, it's just like animals. To them, they're just like animals. So they want to change. But I think it would be difficult. I think Catholicism, why is allowed by the state? I think we have a function to pray in China, is to use evangelization, use our religion, our magisterium to tell the Chinese people this is not the way you should walk down. This is the way of self destruction. This will eventually bring down your whole civilization, and eventually the whole world. So yeah, that's what I would share. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that's very fascinating, and this has been an amazing interview. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing these things. If people want to learn more about your work, where can they find you?
Well, just find Western Confucius, Ziru, Ziru. So um, and yeah, you can find me there. Yeah, because unlike a decade ago, I think I'm now in the West now, so it's a bit more focusing on introducing the situation in China. To people in the West, and at the same time, while I'm in outside of China, so I could try to work for the betterment of the younger Chinese Catholics in China, because I think they do want something, and learn the mistakes or errors what we are having now in the West.
Mhm. And we'll have all of your links here in the description on our YouTube channel. If you want to, for our audience, if you want to check out more of our interviews, we have a lot here on Catholic Family News, our YouTube channel, and our Rumble channel. And if you want to see more of what we write about, you can check out our paper. So you can go to CatholicFamilyNews.com for that and check out more of our interviews. So again, Western Confucius, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.